I have to live to see my 40th birthday. Like, I didn't get through cancer to die before I hit 40. And that's what I did, every focus was on how do I get out of the chair and how do I get back on my feet. And I slowly rehabbed myself. And then, as I was sort of going into clinic and I'd see my cardio oncologist, he would say to me, oh, I know you're well now, but I know you've always wanted a family and, you always said to me, this is important to you, but, I'm really sorry to break it to you. You'll never be able to carry a pregnancy. That was, pardon the pun, but heartbreaking, to know that that was never going to happen. But equally, I had always sort of looked at alternate paths to parenthood. I had already started exploring what other forms of parenthood would look like and ultimately towards surrogacy. And our minds were blown back then. And I think they're blown every single day when we, have these poor children bouncing off the walls in our home. It's just insane, the reality that has played out for us, the family that we now have and the life that we have now built is, it's beautiful. But none of it would have happened without that, cancer diagnosis all at the very start of it. So there's nothing I would change, nothing at all.
Welcome to the 51%, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get back to basics when it comes to women's health. Through expert insights and powerful personal stories, we help you tune into what really matters: your body, your well-being, your life. No one-size-fits-all advice, just real conversations to help you understand your health on your terms. But before we dive in, I've got a quick favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and join the 51% community on our website. It's free and helps us grow, reach more women, and create events that really speak to the health and wealth challenges we all face. And finally, just so you know, everything shared is for information only. It's not medical or financial advice, and always speak to a qualified expert for support that's right for you. Kreena, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on. Today, we're going to be talking about your journey through the issues you've had with your health. And that is a very, very long journey, and it kind of stems from childhood, I believe. Now, could you please introduce yourself and talk about who you are, what you're doing? You're doing some incredible things, I know, as well. And obviously, delve into your journey. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I guess so. I'm Kreena. I'm a mum of 4, first and foremost, but, prior to having my children, I guess life had been quite turbulent and quite difficult. I've been through breast cancer, I've been through heart failure, I've been through infertility, some really, really tough times. But through it, sort of, I guess I found my way and found my purpose and my calling. And, I've gone from a corporate job in the finance world to now really using all of my experiences to help others. And, I do a lot of work in the advocacy space, and I've, run some not-for-profit organizations to support people through breast cancer, through infertility, and just trying to make it easier for the girl that comes behind me, because it was a really tough time for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, with the kind of community as well, a lot of people in the South Asian community don't talk about these things. And having you as a voice, hopefully it can resonate with someone out there and make them feel at ease, or understand that, there are people like me, and there are places and communities I can go to for help as well. So, I mean, let's kind of unpack this. You've had breast cancer, you've had heart failure, you've gone through IVF, with infertility challenges. That's a lot. Now, how did this all start, really? Because, it kind of, some of this may have stemmed from childhood, but you can kind of unpack that and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, on paper, my diagnosis was in 2013, and I was 33 years old when my nipple inverted. But I guess sort of energetically, it probably started a lot before that, because I guess I was brought up in a family where, my parents weren't particularly happily married. It wasn't harmonious in many ways. I was a peacemaker from a very, very young age. sort of juggling the emotions of both my parents. And then in my early 20s, that relationship ended. And so, I became a child who, I guess I was a young adult, but, our inner child is always a child who was trying to deal with her parents splitting up and a divorce, a very messy divorce. And at a very young age became my mum's rock. And I think the dissolution of their marriage put a real stress on me to support this woman who had been through so much in her own life. And in many ways, I look back now, and that cost me my own health because I wasn't boundaried. I didn't know what boundaries were in those days, and the codependence between me and my mum was really real because we'd both gone through such trauma. And then overlaying on that, I think I say this time and time again, I was a typical Patel Gujarati sent to a private school with my sister. And, we weren't particularly affluent, but it was a case of almost, keeping up with what everyone else was doing. Everyone else's children were getting privately educated. And so my parents got really hard to put me through private schooling. And it was something that I was acutely aware of throughout my schooling that, we weren't as rich as everyone else. We lived above a shop. We didn't have this, big house stables that all my white counterparts had. And the struggle and the sacrifice my parents made was big. And, I'm eternally grateful for that because I am who I am because of that and the schooling I went through and the education I received. But I think I put a lot of stress and pressure on myself to make sure I paid back the debt that they got themselves into to educate me. And so I've always been a people pleaser. I very much want to make sure that I do good by people. So if someone's, invested in me, I want to make sure I give it back to them. So, I had to, in many ways, I didn't allow myself to be creative with my career. It was like, what's going to earn me the money? What's going to make them proud? What's going to give me that status? What's going to make me marriageable in many ways? And, how do I tick all those boxes to make sure that they get a return on the investment they put in me? And I think, definitely from my 20s to my 30s, it was a really high pressure time of striving for the best career, being in all the talent pools, and then going on all these arranged dates that my parents would say, that my mum would set up to find Mr. Patel and do what the rule book said I should do. And, I guess a lot of people go through that in our community, and a lot of girls are navigating that path. But for me, I think I took it to the extreme, and it actually, I believe that my disease came from that disease of, my childhood, the stress, the pressure, the never really allowing myself to be who I wanted to be, always being what society wanted me to be. And in the end, and obviously science will say that there were rogue cells that multiplied and created a cancer in my body. And that's, that's what happened at the age of 33. And before even 33, when I got married, that was complex because I married out of caste. I married a Punjabi guy who was Sikh, and there was a lot of friction there in getting married, and again, family friction and drama. And it's just, I can see now how unhappy I was in many ways and unsettled I was. And cancer was the gift that gave me back myself. It was, at the time, it was catastrophic, and it's been, a very, very difficult path and a difficult journey, but it's not one I would ever undo because actually it's been the making of me in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think a lot of women now from that generation, I think we're from a similar generation.
Right.
There was that, family pressure, and also, you've got your own pressure within your family unit, but then there's that added pressure from the outside family coming in, whether that's, with what's going on. So there's so much to unpack there. And then there's that, it contributes to the stress. And we all know that stress and trauma and all these things can cause health problems. And those health problems can come out in any way. We don't know how that will manifest. Everyone's different. But can you talk a bit about, with your cancer diagnosis? I mean, 33 is young, and how did that impact you? Because I'm assuming you were newly married,
Yeah.
and was it straight away that you got that, and how did that go on from then on?
Yeah. So we'd been married about 2 years, just over 2 years when I received my diagnosis. And it's funny because, we got married, went on honeymoon, came back, went to work like everyone does. And then, funnily enough, at the end of 2011, my husband was like, we should just go traveling. We should just pack our bags and go traveling. Partly because, it was driving us mad that the families weren't getting on. And we were like, let's just remove ourselves from it. So we packed our bags, quit our jobs and did a world tour and, traveled literally 360 degrees from England and back, through the Far East and then Australia and New Zealand and the States, and then came back. And we came back and I'd got myself a job again in sort of middle of 2012 and was getting back into the career, like a big successful in my career. And then I've been in my job for just over 12 months when I received this diagnosis. And so in our family life, we were at a point where we were thinking of starting a family. We'd done our traveling, we'd bought our house, and we were like, okay, the next thing is to have children. But, I found an inversion in my nipple, and for a long time I ignored it because I didn't know it was a sign of breast cancer. I didn't have the classic sort of a lump in my chest. I didn't feel that initially. So I thought, well, this is just something I've done, like I've worn really poor clothes or something's pushed it in and it'll come out in its own time. And after a couple of weeks, it didn't come out. And my husband was like, maybe you should go to the doctor and get that checked out because it doesn't seem right. So I went to the doctor. I was very quickly dismissed by them. They were like, oh, it's not going to be anything. You're 33, you've got very low risk factors. I'm a non-drinker, non-smoker. It's going to be nothing, but just book an appointment and we'll check you out. So I waited quite a while for my appointment. And then when I went in, the doctor there just said to me, oh, no, you're 33, you've got a blocked milk duct. That's more than likely what it's going to be because, you're too young to get breast cancer. And she wanted me to just leave there and monitor the inversion for another couple of months. But, I am really feisty when I want something and when I know something's right for me. So I'm super grateful for that characteristic because I sat in that chair and I just said, I'm not leaving. Like I've read enough to be concerned and I'm not leaving until I have a referral to a specialist unit. She just sort of really dismissed me and said, you're so young and there's no point doing a mammogram. Your breast tissue is too dense. We won't see anything. And it's really not likely to be anything. And, I think if someone else had walked out of that room, they would be dealing with a very different reality today. They potentially wouldn't be here today because I got that referral. And over the next few weeks, went through a load of tests, screenings and mammograms and biopsies. And, a very long story short, was diagnosed with a stage 3 breast cancer in 2003. And for anyone who doesn't know the stagings, it goes from stage 1, 2, 3, 4 being an incurable cancer. And the proximity to stage 4. So again, for people who don't know, stage 2 cancer, breast cancer is where cancer is just contained within the breast. Stage 3 is when it's tried to leave the breast and go to other parts of your body using your lymph nodes. And stage 4 is when it's successfully left your breast and then set up home in other organs or bones or other parts of your body where it becomes incurable but treatable. For me, my lymph nodes were 50% marked. So that means that 50% of my lymph nodes contained cancer through my left arm. And had I waited that next 2 months, I have no doubt that would have turned to a stage 4 breast cancer diagnosis. So I do so much of the work I do because I think that, as South Asians, we are not breast aware in any way. We don't talk about the disease. My own ma, so my mum's mum, went through breast cancer twice. And I was in my late teens when she went through it. But never, ever as a family did we talk about it. We just knew she had something wrong with her and she would go to these appointments. But it was never like, this is breast cancer. And actually, this is what is happening to her. This is what we should all be aware of. This is what we should learn. This is how we check our breasts. We didn't have any of that conversation. And I just think, one, if we'd had that conversation, I would have probably got help sooner and I would have a totally different prognosis to the one I have. And then And two, I don't want that to happen to my daughter or her daughter or any generations that come beyond us. So I almost feel that it's been a gift in many ways for future generations, because I now use the story to make sure that the people I love and the people I care for and the general population who follow me in any way become breast aware and know that this is a disease that can happen in young women. It can be devastating, but equally, I really always share the story of hope, because I've built such a beautiful life beyond the disease. And at the time, I thought it was going to crush every dream I ever had. But all it did was make me reframe those dreams and chase them in a different way. And so I think it's really important that you're that person who's representing your community so people know what to look for. But two, you also are that sort of beacon of hope for someone who's in the real trenches and going through the disease and not being able to see light at the end of the tunnel. I think, stories of hope are so important for anyone in any walk of life. And it's a real gift that I have that to give out to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I think all the work you do and all the, the voice of, your voice and what you represent, I'm sure, especially in the South Asian community, you're right. It's not talked about. I had no idea about a lot of things when I was growing up. I didn't even know what a period was until I bloody had mine. It was
No.
like, all these
Yeah.
things. And you discover as you get older, and we do want our children, whether they're boys or girls, to, to make sure, because everyone has females around them, it's not
Exactly.
in some shape or form, and
Yeah.
everyone needs to be aware of these things. And, good for your husband to encourage you to go to the doctor,
Absolutely.
And the key message really here is that you actually advocated for yourself so
Yeah.
hard that, it was only then that you got the results you wanted. Probably still slightly not quick enough, really, because it was still a no, but you pushed and pushed. And that's the key message I want to put across. If you think something isn't right, whether it turns out to be right or wrong, positive or negative, the outcome, be feisty, push for it, and get what you need done. I just wanted to ask you, was that through the NHS or privately?
NHS.
NHS.
Yeah, that's when my initial diagnosis came. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because
And I think, now there is a lot more conversation about young people and breast cancer, and now young people are being taken seriously because there are voices out there who are reminding clinicians that this does happen in young women. And we know statistically that there's a huge, there is definitely a rise in incidences in young women and people who are outside of the national screening program. So, I think now when I talk to GPs, they are far more aware of this. But self-advocacy is just, it's something we have to do. And I think in many ways, because we've had an NHS and a place where people care for us for free, sometimes we take our health for granted because it's like, oh, such and such will look after me, or such and such, it's such and such's problem. It's the doctor's problem. But actually, no, our health is our problem. It's our concern. And actually, we own it. And it's your body. And it's your responsibility to get those symptoms checked out and to make sure that you advocate for yourself, because the system's a busy one and you could easily get lost in it. So knowing your signs and symptoms. So people always say, self-checking, I don't do it. Why should I do it? I'm not going to get cancer. I'm like, you're not looking for cancer at any point when you're self-checking. You are making sure your breast tissue is normal, so that when something abnormal presents itself, you know that that's unusual and you know that it's the time to get help. If you've never checked your breasts and then you find a lump, you don't know if that's a regular lump that appears with your monthly cycle. You don't know if that's just fatty tissue. But if you're checking it all the time and that lump remains and then it changes, you're empowered to go and get help from your clinician, because you're informed and you've done the background work yourself. And I never did that before my diagnosis. So it's kind of like I don't want people to be scared about checking their breasts, because you're not doing it to find something. You're doing it to know what's normal. And so if anything abnormal appears, go and get help.
yeah, absolutely. And that's the case for most of your body as well. There's areas women should be checking, even around, for gynecological issues, even checking around your vagina and all of that. Just to make sure what's normal and what's not normal.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that's going on down there as well, or anyway, at least you've got something to go against, and you can go to your GP and say, this is my normal and this is not normal anymore. And,
Mm.
then advocate like that as well. So, well done for you for really being feisty. And the problem is being feisty also, women end up, when they see a feisty lady, it's kind of like, oh, she's just too strong-headed
Yeah.
and it's too this and that.
Yeah.
There's those narratives as well, especially in the South Asian community, right?
Yeah.
Let's face it, when you go down that road. Um, I wanted to ask you, with all the pressures of the family and all of that stuff going on, how did you deal with that and kind of, you know, get more kind of positive? And what advice would you give for people that are going through all of the, whether it's childhood trauma and dealing with the effects of that, people pleasing and gossip, and I mean, there's so many things, marriage and being ready for that and all of those things. How did you deal with that? And what advice would you give on that side of things?
I think like my biggest advice, and I say this time and time again, is allow yourself to feel everything you're feeling. I think so often we're sort of like pushed to sweep our emotions under the carpet or to get over something that's happened to us that's really painful or traumatic. And it all takes time. Like it's all a process. And, if you're falling apart, you allow yourself to fall apart. I definitely did, when I initially had my diagnosis and I had a really rocky situation with my in-laws when I was first diagnosed, and I felt like our world was just falling apart. And I thought my husband would probably leave me, and he'd be told to go and marry someone else, and everything I knew just fell apart. And my job became at risk of redundancy, and everything familiar, every single one of those tick boxes got absolutely blasted when I was diagnosed. And for a very long time, I wasn't this vocal about my disease. And sometimes in the past, I've beat myself up. I'm like, oh, I should have done it sooner. And I'm like, no, but that was my process. I had to come inward. I had to reflect. I had to break in order to rise and rebuild. And that's totally fine. To me, strength is not measured by how much we put ourselves out there. To me, strength is measured by the amount of vulnerability we allow ourselves to feel, and the amount of with acceptance. And it's the whole thing. Like it's allowing yourself to fall apart, knowing that you have the strength and courage to rebuild yourself. But it's a process, and it will take time, and there's no one rushing you through it. When I do come across people who I feel they're putting on, I get like, obviously I get lots of people come over to me when they're diagnosed. I either get people who put a mask on and they're like, it's all going to be fine. Da, 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 da. To those people, I'm like, I know it's going to be fine, but it's also okay for you to feel that grief and, give them and I hold space and allow people to fall apart in a safe space. And then you get people who maybe can't pull themselves out of that negative mindset, who can't see the light. For them, it's like, you have to enable that in yourself. And I think I always get back to childhood. Like I would say, like, we're so much more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And, you just have to look at your own past and your own childhood to know that every other obstacle you've ever overcome, every other obstacle you've faced, you've overcome. And so this is just another one of those. And it might feel bigger and it might feel badder and it might feel worse, but you do have it within you. You have got so much power within you, and it's allow yourself the time to fall apart, but then allow yourself to have that self-belief that you're going to come back, that you're going to come back super strong and, and actually such a more rounded human being. I think now if I look at myself, I'm like, I'm so different to the girl pre-cancer, and so many things in my life have shifted. Like, what was important to me pre-cancer is in many ways not important to me today. And what all it's done is just bring me closer to like my authentic self. I don't chase the titles or the money or the status, which I think as Indians we chase so much. It's not important anymore, really. All that's important are my beautiful children, and every single day that I get to wake up on this planet, it's a gift. And making sure we hold gratitude for that is super important. And I think that can get you out of the most trickiest of times. If you remember how grateful and fortunate you are to wake up every single morning with a roof over your head and food on the table, from there, the only way is up.
I love that. Thank you so much. It's yeah, I mean, it makes me even feel like, with the Asian mentality is that there is a lot of the status and the kind of there's a process, right? And it's a vocal process. It's not even a hidden process
Yeah.
of, you do this and then you do this, you go to university and then you get married and then you have children.
Yeah.
And, there's but it's a heavy process. It's a heavy process to
Mhm.
follow because you don't ever really get to think about what you really want to do, who you
No.
are and what you actually want to do. Do I even want to follow the process? Who knows?
Mm.
I'll never know because I just follow the bloody process as well, to be
Yeah.
honest, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so when you got your diagnosis, finally, what was the process from then on, in terms of the chemo and the road to recovery? And I know there are lots of other challenges
Mm.
you faced along the way
Mm.
as well.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed, and that process ran really quickly. Once the diagnosis came in, it was very quick in terms of getting into a hospital, getting an oncologist, getting a treatment plan. And I had a double mastectomy. Initially I had a single mastectomy, so the affected breast was removed. And then a couple of years down the line, I had the other breast removed to reduce the risk of the cancer coming back in the other breast or another breast cancer, just because we'd had quite a strong family history. So I had the other breast removed. I went through chemotherapy, radiotherapy, 10 years of endocrine therapy. But I guess before chemo, we had a really important conversation around what the future would look like. And I remember sitting in the room with my oncologist thinking, I don't know why we're talking about the future. I might not be here in a year's time. Why are we having this conversation? I could just die. And he said to me, like, your fertility is going to be affected by this treatment, and there's a real chance that your ovum is going to be damaged. Because the way chemotherapy works is it finds rapidly dividing cells. Say, like our cells in our body divide at a certain rate, and then there are some cells that divide faster. So the reason cancers grow is because they divide faster than our healthy cells, so they grow faster. And chemotherapy targets them. But what it also targets then are other rapidly dividing cells, and they typically are our nails, our hair, and our ovaries. And that's why we experience hair loss. It's why people often lose nails during treatment, and then ovary is why people their fertility is affected because the chemotherapy can damage the ovaries. So he said to me, this likely going to affect you given the type of cancer you have. And I'd done some homework and I said, I know this is going to be an issue and I would like to preserve my fertility before starting treatment. And that was a real difficult situation because I had a very hormonally sensitive cancer. So I was 100% on estrogen and progesterone feeding my cancer. So basically, any treatment that would put estrogen into my body would aggravate the cancer more. And obviously, to go through IVF, you're pumping hormone into your body. So my oncologist wasn't particularly supportive of that. But for me, I was like, children had always been something I wanted. And children was always, I'd always seen myself as a mum from a young age. Like I've always wanted to be a parent. So I went through IVF the week before we started chemotherapy, and that was pretty grueling. Like trying to create a new life when you have no idea if you're going to be alive to see it is mentally. It was the hardest thing I've done in many ways. Trying to be optimistic and brave and look to the future and a baby when really I was hanging on to life by my fingernails.
Yeah, I didn't realize that you would even be able to do that, to be honest. So you were going through chemotherapy to treat the cancer and to eradicate the cancer, and at the same time going through an IVF process, which is a huge impact on your body as well.
So I went through the IVF before we started chemo, but immediately before. So it was like, right, we've got 14 days, we do one cycle, and then you're onto the chemo chair from there.
Right. So would there be an instance where if that was successful, you would have been pregnant and going through chemo, or not necessarily?
Basically an egg or embryo harvesting process. You don't re-implant to get pregnant. You take it, you're taking the eggs out, fertilizing them, and then putting them in the freezer to use when you're well enough to use them. So that's exactly what we did.
Oh, right. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's you kind of did the first step of the IVF.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make that clear because I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure whether you kind of literally started IVF, went through the whole process. So you could have done it
No, that wouldn't be possible because you'd damage a fetus with your treatment. So
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was thinking, oh, I wasn't sure. Okay, so just to clarify, yeah, you went through the first stage so that you could freeze.
total preservation to freeze
Yeah.
embryo. Yeah.
Okay, fine. And then from then on, you continued with the chemo and the therapy.
Yeah. From there, it was, keep 14 rounds of chemo and I think like 25 rounds of radiotherapy. Um, and then after the treatment and after a bit of recovery, I then had the other breast removed surgically and then a double reconstruction of my breasts. So yeah, it was pretty grueling.
How did that impact you, with your mental health and even, obviously it would have had a huge impact on your husband as well.
Yeah, I think at the time you're just on this train and you just have to ride it. There's no, it's like a non-stopping service that just takes you through and you can't get off at any point and you're just doing it. So quite a lot of this is, I only processed it in the years after coming out of the other side of things, because whilst you're in it, you're just in it, and you just got to do what you got to do to get through and survive. Really, it's all about survival, at the point of diagnosis and treatment, and then once that treatment ends, like in in so many ways, that was the hardest time for me when actually chemo's finished, radio's finished, your routine appointments have finished, and the help stops coming and the people stop visiting and the doctors stop checking and the safety net seems to disappear because you haven't got that team holding you, whereas throughout treatment you're really held. And then you sort of start to emerge and think, what on earth just happened? What have the last 3 years of my life been and what have I lost and how do I regain anything from the devastation that has just cannonballed its way through our home and our personal lives and everything that we had planned and laid out for our future. And that's why I always think it's really important to make sure people give themselves time, because my healing really kicked in after active treatment ended, and that path to self-discovery kicked in after, the intensity of active treatment. That's when you have the time and space to reflect on what happened, what you want to do with your future, where you want to go with your life and how you want to make it count. That it happened afterwards.
How long was the process?
So active treatment for me was about sort of 7 months, I think, just over 7 months of actually sort of going through chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And then by the time for all my surgery to complete, it was 2 years pretty much from the day of diagnosis, because I'd had to have intervals between each bits of surgery. So I, from diagnosis to having sort of gone through treatment and both my breasts rebuild was about two and a bit years. To come
Well,
up
so that's a long process. So it was almost nearly 3 years at the point where you were able to think, right, now what? How am I feeling? And all these, things coming, flooding in. How did did anything change with the family dynamics for the best?
No, it's really interesting. I don't know if this is us culturally, but through my treatment, I didn't let my mum really see my vulnerability at all. I felt like, because I'd seen so much of her pain, I couldn't show her any of mine. And, I kept that very much to myself. She never came to the chemo ward with me. I always wore a wig or a hair covering when I was with her. I didn't let her see my bald head. So I was very protective of her. My relationship with my in-laws really struggled. It didn't really fix itself for, I would say, 5 or 6 years. So I just accepted that. And one of my biggest lessons, and, one of the lessons I always give people through my work and, the art of being brave, which is like my keynote stuff, is that acceptance is everything. And you can't control people. You can't control their behaviors. You can't control their attitude. It's on accepting that is really important. Even your disease, you can't control it, right? It's come to you. You accept that and then you find a way to move on from it, because, I would come back to that equation that says something like pain plus resistance equals suffering. So the more you resist it, the more you suffer. So you remove that resistance, and yes, there is still pain there, but you're not perpetuating it. You're finding a way to move through it. Like you, as you know, things are still really difficult for us, but we found a way to just carry on and keep on going. And over time, it healed itself, you know, and today it's better than I could ever have imagined. So it does get better.
Oh, wow. No, that's lovely to hear. I'm glad. I'm glad there was kind of light at the end of the tunnel on that respect, because, you know, quite frankly, these situations get worse and worse and worse, and they never change. And, you know, with some families, they do not change and kind of reverse things and make things better. So that is definitely glad to hear.
It's the ego at the end of the day for us. And, you know, so often our ego just is given far too much attention, particularly in our community. You know, we just have, we're like, he did that to me, and so now I can't talk to him again. And she did that to me, so I can't talk to her again. And like when I had my own issues going on, the only way I could really compartmentalize and come to terms with it is that everyone lives in a bubble, and it's their own bubble, and what's going on in their bubble is the most important thing to them. So like to me, my diagnosis and staying alive was everything to me, and I had to make sure I maintained that bubble and stopped it from popping. I had to keep it going. But to my in-laws, it was probably, you know, whatever arguments we'd have or whatever, you know, had gone on between us was really big for them. And so they couldn't, their bubble was all consumed by this, you know, this argument or whatever it was, and they couldn't move beyond it. And so you have to give people that time and space to just live within, you know, within this thing that they've created. And it's only once you collaboratively decide to move forwards that you really move forward. And if one person wants to move forward and the other doesn't, then it's going to keep coming back, and the situation is just going to keep repeating itself. But, you know, for me, I think we all decided that life's too short, and, you know, it's time to move on. And, you know, I don't like the word forgiveness, because I think forgiveness implies that you have a higher status than someone. So if you want to forgive someone, you're thinking, oh, I'm better than you, so I'm going to forgive you, or that whole narrative of being the better person. I think it's just acceptance of what has happened, acceptance that everyone's been hurt, but acceptance that we all want to move forward. We all want to like be happy, and we want to make the most of the time that we have. Once you accept that and you all take that path together, you can create something so beautiful, you know? And so, yeah, I've had to do that time and time again, actually. So, yeah, it's a tricky lesson, but it's one that honestly, it just pays such dividends. You know, with my own dad, we didn't really talk about this, but when my parents divorced, I was 21, and I didn't speak to my dad again for 20, well, it was about 20 years by the time we reconnected. So all through my diagnosis, he wasn't there. My wedding, he wasn't there. Heart failure, the birth of the children, he just wasn't there. But then in late life, you know, something brought us back together again. I'd always wanted to go back, and I always wanted to heal it. But for a lot of it, he was rejecting me. And, you know, in the early days, he was like, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. And then eventually he joined me on this path, and he was like, oh my God, I can't believe that we've left, you know, not been in touch, and you have 4 kids and you've been through all this. And it was the most beautiful thing. And people always, how can you forgive him for never being there for you? And I'm like, but it's not about that. It's about just allowing him to be a part of my life now, because I want that and he wants that. So why allow the ego to come in between it? Because our time is so short. And, you know, as it happened, he passed like a year after we connected again, and he passed, which was really painful, but also insanely beautiful that we had that time together, because we chose to move forward from, you know, the past and the pain of the past. And so I think for anyone who's navigating those horrible situations, I'm not taking away from the pain of it. Yeah, it can be really, really difficult, and it can be hurtful, and our hearts are broken, and they're broken because of what people do to us. But really, the question you have to ask yourself is, do I see a future with this person by my side, or do I not? And if you do see them in your future, then you have to move the mountains that you have to move to make that reality come true. And if you don't, then you make your peace with that, and you draw your boundary and live in the way you want to. It's not that you have to forgive or move on or be connected to every single person who's ever been a part of your life. It's about finding what's important to you, and then having the courage to allow that to play out in whatever way. And there's so much vulnerability there as well. Again, like when I connected with my dad, I had to be so vulnerable about everything that I had felt and everything that had happened to us. But I had to let that flow for our connection to be authentic, you know? And it was. And like I said, it turned out to be like probably the best 12 months of him being my dad in my entire 45 years of life. You know, it was the only time that I felt he was my father was in those late years.
Oh no, that's lovely. You know, I'm glad that you got that 1 year, you know, because that whole disconnection for most of your life, and then that brought you back, and it's great
Mm.
that you had that acceptance in you. And you're right, you know, look, this isn't about, you know, if someone's not been nice to you or done something to you or whatever that might be, um, you know, you don't want them in your life, that's fine. But then if you do and you're resisting that, that causes
Mm.
added strain in your mind and body, really,
Yeah.
quite frankly. So it's kind of, why not just let loose and let go?
Yeah.
And when you're both ready, like you said, it's a
Mm.
collaborative thing, which is a great way of putting it, then
Mm.
move forward with that. Yeah, I think that's great. So all this
Like,
time your father didn't know all everything that you were going through, or did he know and it was just
I think
not
he knew
happening?
the community. Yeah,
Oh yeah, of course.
he knew we were still connected. So I think he knew quite a lot of
Yeah,
what was going on in life, but he just wasn't ready to be there, and that was
yeah,
fine. You know, he's on his own journey, and I think, you know, I'm really spiritual, and my mindset is very much in that space. And I always say that, like, you know, we all come to Earth, and our souls already know the path that we're taking, right? So actually, people always say to me, "How do you keep overcoming it? How do you keep coming back when all these we haven't actually talked about everything else, but when all this
yeah,
other stuff happens to you?" And I was like, but the thing is, you know, my soul, before it took its form in this body, it saw all of that. It's a soul contract. It agreed to go through everything that my life is going to be. And so, what's the point in resisting it? This was always going to flow, and this was always going to play out in the way it was going to play out. So, actually, again, accepting that, and that all this adversity came to me because it was always going to come to me, is, you know, once I accept that, it's so much easier to make sure I come back, and I come back stronger from it, because that's in my mindset. That's the reason it's happened to me, is because adversity has given me such, it's just given me such a rich life, because everything has perspective, you know, everything is laced with gratitude. Everything is just, the lens through which I see life is so different because of it. So you know, in my mind, my soul was like, yeah, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be the most horrendous decade of her life. 30 to 40 was just so painful. But what happens beyond 40 is nothing short of miraculous. And it's an absolute joy to experience it. So there's no, there's no resentment. There's no, you know, I honestly don't feel resentful to anything that's happened. And I don't really have, I guess in some ways I have envy when I see people who are really healthy and they do everything right in a regular way, people who've conceived regular, you know, in a normal way, unassisted. And I'm like, God, I wish I could do that. It's not jealousy in any way. It's just like
mm,
envious because it was easy for you and you didn't have to go through everything. But I don't think that that doesn't make me want to do my way any differently now I've gone through it, because whilst it would have been great to have that straight linear path without all the obstacles, I don't think I'd be the person I am or the mother I am if I didn't go through the obstacles. So it's just that sort of gratitude and grief equilibrium that's always so difficult to manage, but one that I come back to time and time again. Is just like, you know, it's been difficult, but I accept that, and it's been difficult, but because of that, I don't survive, I thrive. And I think that having that life where I've thrived beyond adversity is, it's really beautiful. And yeah, and then I guess, you know, for me, that's a great thing. But also, I want to make sure that anyone else who's in a difficult time knows that for themselves, that there's going to be something really beautiful that comes out the other side of it, because perspective shifts so significantly. And also for my children, I think the thing is, when we're kids and the way our community raises us is that nothing bad happens. So we don't talk about anything bad. So actually, you're never going to have, nothing bad's going to happen to you because we don't talk about it and we assume everything's always great. Well, that's just not life, right?
no,
Hard things happen to people day in, day out. And what I want to teach my kids is that, you know, my kids know, like now they're starting to familiarize themselves with the word cancer, and they're only 4 and 7. They see my scars. They know I was very ill. They see the photos, and I want them to know that I was very poorly, but now I'm happy and I'm healthy. So I want them to know that bad things will happen. That's a fact of life. But how we approach them and how we overcome them and how we move through them, that's really that's the character building stuff that I want to teach them, because we didn't have that. And we didn't have those toolkits. And, you know, I really had to sort of find that myself through my cancer diagnosis. But now I've found it, I want to give it out to as many people as I can because it's so useful.
Mm, absolutely. Look, you know, you talk about envy and jealousy, and I just think it's normal to feel these things. Anyone, where it can go wrong is obviously you know, you're that envious and that jealous where you start becoming negative or doing unkind things to people, and approaching it in a different way. But feeling envious and slightly jealous, that they're normal feelings, and we shouldn't, you know, berate ourselves for feeling
I think
these
there's
things
quite a
either.
distinction.
Sometimes there is a distinction.
Envy and
Yeah.
jealousy is a big distinction. I think like I don't think I'm actually jealous of anyone, because I just don't, that's just not me. But I think that
Yeah.
I have envy for people who have certain
Yeah.
privileges, and I do think fertility privilege is something that people carry and they don't realize they have it. Health privilege is things that people carry and they don't, you know, it's only once it's taken away from you that you realize how privileged the people who have it are, but they have no idea of what privilege
Yeah.
they. So I think that if your envy creeps into jealousy, that's time to check yourself and see why, and why that's sort of gone into that zone, and what can you do to rein it back? Because it's fine to see other people and think, God, I wish it was that way for me. That is totally fine. But the is when that starts to eat away at you, it becomes the wrong energy and the wrong narrative, and you need to rein it back and have a look at sort of where you're at and where your head's at.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So look, you know, we haven't talked about, it doesn't just stop at the breast cancer, you know, from then onwards. Can you talk through what happened? Because you had the diagnosis, obviously you were treated, and then what?
And then, so like you said, it was about 2.5 years. And so we were like, right, let's go on a holiday. So it was pretty much 3 years since ending active treatment that we booked this trip to Vancouver, which was meant to be this huge holiday that we went on, and had a whole list of life experiences we wanted to tick off whilst we were out there. And we were going to meet some very old friends as well and stay with them. So we jumped on a plane in the June of 2016. And within a day, I was feeling unwell and I was coughing and I was just generally poorly and feeling grim. And so I thought, oh, I'm typically one of these people who picks a cold up on any flight she goes on. So I was like, oh, it's happened again. I've got a cough and a cold, and it'll be done in a couple of days. So soldiered through the next couple of days, but every day became more sluggish, and every day it became difficult to breathe. And every day I was really lightheaded, and I was like, God, this is, whatever it is, has knocked me for sick. And after 2 or 3 days, I said to my husband, by this time we were out in the countryside at a friend's lake house, and there was no sort of amenities nearby. And I thought, we're going to have to go back to Vancouver a day early because I actually can't breathe. And I think it's really serious. So I want to go and get treated before it ruins the entire holiday. So we went back to the city, and the plan was to go to the plan was to go to a pharmacy the next day and get some medication. And that night became one where I literally couldn't breathe. And, you know, the only way I could breathe was by retching almost, but that was making me sick. And I was up and down all night, and we were in a friend's house, and I didn't want to wake them up. They had young kids, and I was like, my God, I'm like, I literally can't breathe. What am I going to do? Like, I can't explain it other than I felt like I was drowning, like someone was just putting my head in water and I couldn't breathe. So I was trying to let that play out. And then at like 4 or 5 in the morning, I said to my friend, I had to go and wake her up. And I was like, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to call an ambulance or go to a walking centre. And we were like, we don't want to inconvenience people. We're in another country. Let's just go to a walking centre and hopefully get treated there. So went to a walk-in centre and they saw me and then they were like, you need to get to hospital fairly quickly. So they had to go to the local hospital. The local hospital couldn't diagnose me. They didn't really know what was going on. And so after about 7 hours with them and multiple scans, they were like, we need to send you to a bigger hospital. So they sent me to Vancouver General Hospital, and we were in A&E for about another 10 hours, by which time I was starting to lose consciousness. I was not able to saturate. So every time they were taking my blood, I was desaturating really quickly. In the end, they sort of ended up putting like a mask on me called a BiPAP to help me breathe, which is like a Darth Vader type thing. And everyone who came in was like, it's just not looking good. We cannot stabilize it. We don't know what's going on. And because, again, my age and my, I guess, my youth, they didn't send cardiology in to review me until the very last sort of port of call. So basically they're like, first we look for a pneumonia because you've been on a flight. We think maybe she's got something going on with her lungs, or maybe she's got a clot on her lungs, or maybe she's got something, related to the flight. So they were investigating all of that, but no one really looked into the medical history with enough detail for the light bulb moment until cardiology came down. And so, it was late in the day, by which point we'd been told, she's not going to make it through. You need to call your family. She's, her heart is struggling now, and we can't oxygenate her, even with all the oxygen in the world. We might not be able to maintain her. So get people on planes if you can get them on them, say their final goodbye. So my sister came over, and cardiology then came in, and sort of the cardiologist put a echo machine on my heart, and another one held my hand. And by this point, I couldn't speak. I was pretty much non-coherent, but he sort of whispered in my ear, and he just said, if your chemotherapy was red in color, squeeze my hand. I know you cannot speak to me now, but squeeze my hand if you can hear me and you know that fact to be true. And I knew it. And it was almost like a real sort of moment where I'm drawn back in time, and I can remember that needle going into my hand and the vial full of red liquid, and I squeezed the hand immediately. And at the same time, someone else who was reading my echo obviously saw something pretty horrendous and sort of banged a switch at the back of the wall behind my bed, and this red light just appeared. And all of these cardiologists were like, get her to ICU now. And so what transpired was that the heart function had dropped to 6%. My heart function had become dilated so much so that the heart muscle itself was almost falling apart. And as a result, fluid had backed up in my heart, in my lungs, all over my body. And they just couldn't do anything to manage it, because they're like, we can't take the fluid out because her heart is so, so broken that if we take the fluid out, she'll just have a heart attack. So, and they were like, but we can't keep her lungs overloaded with this fluid because that's can have some breathing, and we can't get the oxygenation to happen. So it was a really horrible time. And I ended up spending 2 weeks in ICU, cardiac intensive care. But the team were incredible. And, I was very lucky that in Vancouver, the woman who was cardiologist on duty when I was admitted was a cardio oncologist, and the cardio oncologist specialized in cardiac dysfunction after cancer treatment. So she picked it up, and her team picked it up, and they were like, this is therapy-related heart failure. And whilst it didn't mean it, knowing what that diagnosis was, I mean, it didn't change the treatment. The fact was they still had to manage blood pressure and fluid and heart function. It meant that the people treating me had this ability to see what was going on with my health and to care for me appropriately, and then to make sure I was referred into the right clinic when I got back here to the UK. And, I was bedbound in my heart, and I really couldn't walk, to I was in a wheelchair. We then weren't allowed to leave Vancouver because my heart wasn't strong enough for a flight. So we were held there for 8 weeks. And during that time, I went from a heart function of 6% and only got it up to 11%. And by which time they were like, we don't think it's going to get any better than this anytime soon. So really, we just have to send you home, and we have to hope that you make it on the flight, and send you with medical assistance and with oxygen. And so, I was sent home with medical assistance. And when I touched down in Heathrow, I think, I've never felt more grateful than I felt that day for surviving the flight and getting back home, because I wanted to see my mum. And I hadn't told her I'd been in heart failure because I thought she didn't want to do anything. There's no point in telling her. So we'd just be telling her we've extended our holiday and we're going on more tours. And she was like, okay, whatever, that's strange, but tell me when you're back. And so then when we got back, I went to her house and I told her that, this is what happened and I almost lost my life. And that time I was in a wheelchair and I stayed in a wheelchair for quite a time. Whilst I rehabbed myself and got into a sort of cardio-oncology clinics in the UK and then rehabilitation clinics in the UK. And I was 37 at the time. And I was like, I have to live to see my 40th birthday. Like I didn't get through cancer to die before I hit 40. And so that was my goal. My goal was like just to stay alive. And that's what I did, every focus was on how do I get out of the chair and how do I get back on my feet. And I slowly rehabbed myself. And then on my 40th birthday, I was like, I got it. By this time I was moving and mobile and doing everything. I was like, I've got to do something big. So for my 40th, I took part in a charity trek to the Himalayas with a charity called Copperfield. It's an awareness charity. And I was like, I've just got to keep going because I want people to know that there's still life, and despite all of that, I survived, and I live a life that is just so beyond my wildest dreams, and so for me, yeah, heart failure was brutal. It was brutal. There's no other way to say it. It was scary, and in many ways scarier than the cancer diagnosis because it was so sudden.
Yeah.
With the cancer diagnosis, I felt we were in control. We had time, we had doctors there who knew what they were doing. With heart failure, we were in a different country. We had no idea it was coming. We were told it was death immediately. It was very, very scary. And, I'm so grateful to have made it through that time. And yeah, I got back and, as I was sort of going into clinic and I'd see my cardio-oncologist, he would say to me, one appointment with it, he just said, I know you're well now, but I know you've always wanted a family and, you always said to me, this is important to you, but, I'm really sorry to break it to you. You'll never be able to carry a pregnancy. Your heart is not strong enough. The drugs we give you to keep you alive would damage any fetus. It's just not something I can suggest you do. He's like, obviously I can't control what you do, but if you fall pregnant, it's not going to end well for either you or the child. So my advice you don't like to get pregnant or have children. And, that was, pardon the pun, but heartbreaking, to know that was never going to happen. But equally, I had always sort of looked at alternate paths to parenthood because my cancer diagnosis also made pregnancy really difficult and trying to get pregnant difficult because I had to do that. I would have to break my cancer therapy, which was a 10-year plan. And every time I went to my oncologist, he was like, no, we can't, let's not break it. The risk of it coming back is too high. So, I had already started exploring what other forms of parenthood would look like. And heart failure just pushed me further into that journey of discovery and exploration and ultimately towards surrogacy as a path to parenthood. So, when my cardio-oncologist delivered that news that actually you'll never be pregnant again, I would like, no, he said something like that motherhood's going to be really difficult. And I said, but it's not impossible. Someone else will do it for me. And he sort of looked at me and he was like, how are you going to make that happen? And I was like, people are doing it. People are making it happen. And there's no reason why they can do it and I cannot do it. So this is what I'm going to do. And yeah, so then we went on to this sort of remarkable path to parenthood that is surrogacy.
Wow. I had no idea, for me, I just thinking, cancer is cancer. I didn't even know you can get heart failure through chemotherapy. I didn't know, I mean, why would I know that? It's not something that I would, find out. But there's so many things that, you wouldn't know about this. And I hope someone out there, if they are going through chemotherapy, not to, worry them or anything, but kind of understands that, that there other things can happen.
Further down the line.
Further down the line. And if it does, it could be this. Do you think your diagnosis with the heart failure, there was a delay in that because you were in Vancouver and not in the UK? Because
no, not in that. Actually, so the funny thing is, like the acute incident happened in the June, but actually in the April we had been on holiday and we went to watch the Euros and our seats were at the top of the stadium and I'm generally a fit person, right? But I'd had this massive double reconstruction at the end of 2015. And so we got into April of 2016 and I was like climbing these stairs and I couldn't breathe. And I was like, what is going on? Why am I so unfit? And actually Thati was like really concerned. He was like, oh my God, this is not normal, but let me just get you some water and, calm things down. And I remember like thinking this is a bit unusual, but I didn't really think anything more of it because I had been to my doctor before saying I was breathless, and he was like, "You're deconditioned. Your surgery was massive," and I was like in bed for 3 months beyond my double mastectomy because I picked up infection after infection. So they were like, "Just give it time. You'll get your fitness back." And so in my head, I was like, "I'm just really exhausted from everything my body's been through." And I didn't think that incident in April was anything to worry about, but actually what it was probably was the start of this, downwards turn of my heart and my heart function. But I had no idea that heart failure could happen beyond chemotherapy. I had no idea what the symptoms were. I had been gaining weight. And again, I was like, oh, I'm just gaining weight because I've been inactive. But actually it wasn't. It was fluid building up in my body. So the telltale signs were there. But I just wasn't aware what they were trying to tell me. And again, it's why I do what I do, because I don't ever want anyone to say I'm not having chemotherapy, because actually you have to have that to treat the cancer.
Yeah.
But what I want you to know is that if you become breathless, if you start to gain weight, if you're, finding it difficult to lay flat on a bed and you're coughing all the time, go and ask someone to check your heart, because that chemotherapy can be causing other, damage to other parts of your body delayed. And the quicker you get it seen to, the quicker it's picked up, the quicker you get treated for it. And then the better your outcome and your prognosis. So, there was a delay, but not because of where I was geographically. There was a delay because of my lack of awareness. And I think from systemic issues, my heart was never routinely checked or scanned. And I think that's now my oncologist was like, I don't normally give people your age a heart echo. We never did. We just didn't do it it was never protocol. But now, like once I went through that, I think he was devastated. He was like, I did not see this coming. And it's almost my responsibility and I shouldn't have done this to you. And I was like, it's fine. It's happened. What can we do about it? And so in this private practice, so he was like, I will not prescribe that drug without baseline echoes and routine echoes after seeing what it's done to you. So again, I just take it as like, service to the greater good, that things change for the person who comes after me and they don't have to go through that level of sort of catastrophic heart failure to take them seriously.
It's almost like, obviously there are side effects to chemo and after effects of having it. It's almost like, when you buy medication or you get prescribed medication, there's a really long leaflet in there and it tells you these are the side effects, these are low risk, high risk, whatever. It's almost like you need something like that just so that you're aware, not that it's going to happen to you.
It's there. Well, I think it is there. I mean, no, for me personally, heart failure wasn't talked about to me. That was the thing. I think now when I look, it is there. The information is there. But I think what's really important is to acknowledge that when someone's diagnosed with cancer, the last thing they want to think about is their heart. Like they're just worried about that disease. And so you can tell them everything that might happen. You could have told Kreena of 2013, there's a risk this drug will give you heart failure. I would still have taken that drug because I needed to survive the cancer. So it's like, when do you deliver this information? And then when I think it's really that sort of 6 to 12 months beyond active treatment. That's when you need to be educating patients about what comes next. Because to give it all at the beginning, when you're having the drug itself, no one's going to read it. No one's going to get on board. There's too much else going on. It's once you get through, you're like, right, how do I now, manage my health in the long term? And I think like the advent of social media, that wasn't really, social media wasn't huge when I was diagnosed and people sharing stories wasn't huge. Now we have this platform where we can learn from patients and learn from people's experiences and take that knowledge with us into our, into the future of our, healthcare and our health journeys. And I think that's really, that's kind of why I share and why I do what I do, because I think I could help someone who, something I didn't hear for when I was on my own journey, I could give it to someone else and hopefully change the way their pathway follows.
Yeah, definitely. That's what my mission is, just to give those nuggets of information, even if it's for that one person. One person is one person. You've got 4 wonderful children.
Yes.
Um, it- that was all through, because I know you talked about IVF and then obviously surrogacy. Is that a mixture of both, or was it all through
Yeah.
surrogacy?
So my daughter, she came first in 2018, and she was conceived through surrogacy. So she was my embryo. So she was one of the embryos we created in 2013 and put in the freezer. And we went in for treatment, and the surrogacy journey is a really long one. And if people want to hear about that, I suggest they just go to my podcast, The Intended Parent, and listen to it, because we spend all day otherwise.
Yeah.
Basically, we went on a surrogacy journey, and so we transferred that embryo from 2013 into our surrogate in 2017. And we fell pregnant on the first transfer, which, I was eternally grateful for that. But the difficult thing with when we transferred into her, we had 5 or 6 viable embryos. The remainder were meant to be refrozen for us to try for a sibling, or to try again if this round wasn't successful. And a clinical error meant that those embryos were thrown away without my consent. So we transferred this only surviving embryo into our surrogate, and just prayed and prayed and prayed that it would stick. And, thanks my lucky stars, it did stick. And, she is now 7 years old, and, the biggest gift, of his life and his journey. And yeah, just having her made everything was worthwhile, to hold her in our arms. And, she came carried in the way she was carried, and, really willed to life. That child was, everyone's hopes and dreams in that one embryo. And she's the greatest blessing. And then, Amana, it was only, I think she was about 6 months old when we were like, "Look, we really want to have more children, and how are we going to make it happen?" We knew we would have a long path, because we'd the embryos. So we're like, right, what does it look like? What do we do now? And again, my team were like, it's just not advisable for you to harvest more eggs or embryos, like from a medical perspective, and also from an age perspective now. Like, you're increasing the risk of cancer recurrence for what is probably an older egg, and might not give you the pregnancy that you would hope for. And so we've had to make some really difficult decisions. But by this time, I've been really immersed in the world of infertility. I was talking about cancer and infertility. I was talking about surrogacy. I'd launched a podcast about surrogacy, and I was comfortable exploring other parts of parenthood. So, I sort of said to my husband, I was like, I think the best thing for us to do is get a donor egg. Like, that's going to be the most viable path here, and the one that's going to most likely give us success. And I think by this point, because, at the beginning of my surrogacy journey, I'm really worried about attachment to my child born through surrogacy. And I was like, well, they know I'm their mom, and I've been Amana's mum for a while. And I'm like, this love is not based on DNA or pregnancy or anything else. It's based on a mother-child love. So I started to really counsel myself about having non-biological children and what that would be for me. And that was a long old journey, particularly again in our culture, where it's just not done. We have these dated narratives of like blood is blood, and, blood is thicker than water and all of that. I'm like, hold on, this child I'm going to have will not be my blood. Like, how do I feel about that? How do I feel about knowing I have one who is biologically related and one who potentially won't be? And so there was a lot of work to be done there. And, eventually we did decide on donor conception. But what happened was, in the UK, there were very few South Asian egg donors, right? They're pretty much white. So we knew that we would struggle to find someone who had an egg that would result in a child that looked like us. So we went on a very long journey, because I also wanted to know a bit more about my donor. So I wasn't happy with just getting the sort of portfolio of eye color, hair color, skin, I did a bit more. Because I knew I wasn't carrying the child. I was like, where is my connection coming from? So I found that you can do this thing called known egg donation, where you get to meet your donor, right? And at the time, the easiest and most straightforward path was to do it overseas, because UK legislation was a bit trickier. So we ended up finding an Indian donor who lived in South Africa. And we sent her a picture, and she literally looked like me, same face shape, same face, skin color, long hair, like literally looked like when we were out, if I had treatment, people thought we were sisters. And so we were like, okay, this is our donor. We found her in South Africa. And then, because the way the legalities work, we went to have treatment in North Cyprus. So we flew her to Cyprus, and we flew to Cyprus, created our embryos. And I got to meet this woman who essentially made my family, completed my family. And that was priceless for me, having that time with her. And she, we shared our story and our journey, and she got to meet us and got to know Amana. And even to this day, like, I hold such love for that woman, because without her, my family would never have been complete. So we created our embryos, and then we then had to find a second surrogate, which was a whole other story, which was very complicated, but, found a second surrogate late in 2019. And we were going to go to Cyprus in April to transfer the embryos we created. Me and my surrogate were like, let's go in April, have a little break, do the transfer and come back. And then she calls me one day in January, and she was like, I was just talking to the kids, and if we go in April, then I'm going to be pregnant over Christmas. And that's really tricky when, for a mom, and I want to be present for my kids. So do you reckon we could do February? And I was like, well, it's your cycle. If you can manage the cycle, I can manage logistics. So beginning of January, we decided we're just going to go for February for this embryo transfer. And I book all the flights, and we fly out on sort of the second, third week in February. Get to Cyprus, have our transfer, spend a few days there, come back. And, when we go to our transfer, the line that will never leave any of us is that the doctor says, I've looked at your embryos, and if you transfer one embryo, there's the chances of success are 60% chance of a single pregnancy, but 40% chance of no pregnancy at all. If you transfer two, the chances are an 80% likelihood of a single pregnancy, but a 20% chance of a non-identical twin pregnancy from two embryos taking. And we were like, that's fine. As a team, we talked about twin pregnancies. We were happy for that to happen. And, so we transferred two embryos into our surrogate, waited in Cyprus a couple of days, and came home. We came home, and within the week, borders closed travel around the world for the pandemic. So our April date would have meant we never got pregnant. So February happened for a reason. And then, a couple of things happened in terms of my surrogate health. She had to have some scans. And then one day she was going to a scan, and, she'd been bawling. I was so scared we'd lost the pregnancy. And, it was COVID. I was shielding because of my heart. I couldn't go to the scan with her. And so she was like, don't leave. You stay at home. Do not leave your house. If we're pregnant, you need to stay alive for these children. So I stayed at home. She had her scan and rings me. And she said, are you sitting down? And I'm like, yeah, I'm sitting down. And she goes, okay, I've got some news to deliver. So she delivers her news, which is insane. And long story short, but in the April of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, the news she delivered was that in August 2020, we would become parents, and we became parents again to 3 babies because she was carrying a triplet pregnancy. And our minds were blown back then. And I think they're blown every single day when we, have these poor children bouncing off the walls in our home. And it's just insane, the reality that has played out for us. The family that we now have and the life that we have now built is, it's beautiful. But none of it would have happened without that, cancer diagnosis all at the very start of it. So that's kind of why I always share, because the reality I have now, I could never have dreamt of it. I could never have envisioned this life, but there's nothing I would change, nothing at all. Actually, the only thing I would change is that my mum stayed earthside with us for a little bit longer. That I would change that, but of my personal journey, I wouldn't change anything, because everything led to me, my husband, and our 4 beautiful children. And now the boys are 4 and Amala's 7, and life is great.
Wow. And that's from a 20% chance, right?
Well, it was 20% chance of twins. They didn't even bother with the statistics of, one of the eggs splitting and all of them taking, because that was just, very, very small odds.
Yeah, but at 20%, you'd think, that's not really probably going to happen anyway, because the other chance, it was 80%. Oh, so you'd think, more likely one, definitely. Yeah. Wow, that is just amazing. It's amazing. It's actually made me feel quite emotional when you were saying, just like the process of it, and then all of a sudden getting that phone call, and all during COVID as well. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, very difficult pregnancy. And yeah, the whole, they were born 10 weeks prematurely, so it was a very difficult time.
Yeah.
Bringing them into this world, hoping, and praying that they didn't catch COVID and they didn't get poorly because they had such underdeveloped lungs. But, they made it through. They were always going to make it through. And yeah, here we are all these years later and, happy and healthy. And yeah.
That's fantastic. So what's life for you like now in terms of, you've, gosh, I don't, you've been through a lot, and you've gone through so many different emotions, physical, mental, everything pretty much. What is life for you like now in terms of like medication and checks? And is it an ongoing process still? Or
Yeah.
is it just, it is? Okay.
Well, yeah, it's ongoing. So like my oncology medication is extended. So I still take medication to hopefully prevent the risk of a recurrence. I've been in a medical menopause since the age of 33, which is brutal. And that's debilitating in many ways. And my heart will always need medication to keep it beating. So I will be on that for life, and that brings with it complexities of other organs and kidneys and stuff like that that get overloaded. So, I guess there's still a lot to manage from a health perspective. But, I would take that to just be here. It's fine. It's fine. I accept that as my reality, and that's the hand I've been dealt, and that's what I have to do to live on planet Earth, and that's what I will do to live on planet Earth for as long as possible.
I love that. What are you doing now then? What are your plans? And I know you do a lot of, you're a huge advocate, and you do a lot of talks and events and things. Is that something that you continue to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, it's not conforming anymore. Like I do everything according to my own wishes. And so part of that is making sure my work is aligned. And now my work really is just about, talks and workshops and supporting people and under the art of being brave, which is my banner. And that is really what I've moved into now is, my story is really like sensational. Like, there's big things, but the point is that it doesn't matter what the adversity you're going through is, right? You need the same tools to get over it, whether it's, a divorce, whether it's ill health, whether it's loss of a job, whether it's loss of a parent. Like the pain is the same. And the steps we have to take in self-discovery are the same, and so my work really is about how do you help people, regardless of what they're going through, overcome that adversity and those difficult times. And we all have it in us, it's just empowering people to remember how resilient they are and how courageous they are.
Yeah, I think for sure from everything you have said, even I have taken a lot from that in terms of, the difference between forgiveness and, acceptance. Acceptance is the key, and the collaborative working and all these different things. And I didn't even think of things like that, because you hear this whole narrative of forgiveness, and then you think, oh, do I need to forgive? Do I have to forgive? What does that look like? What is forgiveness? How does that even transpire? I've always had this, I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm out there waiting, trying to forgive like millions of people, but I don't know what that looks like and how that feels. But the way you put it, I definitely know what that looks like and how that feels, because I get that now, that I can actually resonate with. And so even, I've taken a lot from what you said. You're almost like the South Asian kind of, like, I don't know what to call it. Not, not the Oprah, but like something like that.
Well, that's a very big compliment.
Well, no, honestly, like the words of wisdom that you've given, I think is absolutely fantastic, because whether you're going through cancer or whether you're going through nothing, that can help in lots of situations and lots of areas in life for sure. So I really hope, anyone listening they will definitely get something out of this, whether it's cancer, something else, like you said, divorce, it could be anything, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, Kreena, I could go on. There's so many things I could ask you because we didn't even cover medical menopause, which is a completely, different
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for sharing your journey, Kreena. It's really, I'm so glad that you're open and honest about everything that you've been through, really.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me as well. I really appreciate it.